Hello and welcome to iBridge Leadership Stories. I'm your host, Jeff Harnois. Today, our guest is Lois Hoyt, a senior human resources executive. She's a former chief human resources officer and currently leads HR in the public broadcasting space. Lois has decades of experience driving people initiatives for various Fortune 100 and 500 companies, global nonprofit union organizations, startups, publicly traded and privately held employers. Lois's expertise includes optimizing teams through workforce management and engagement efforts, as well as creating sustainable programs that build and foster organizational excellence, which is, of course, our focus here at iBridge. Lois has built HR businesses and infrastructure that enables startup companies to grow and has led high impact change initiatives, fusing diverse work cultures while preserving high-performing talent in large corporate culture during stressful mergers and acquisitions and private equity takeovers. Prior to her current role, Lois led HR initiatives as the Vice President of Human Resources for various organizations in a variety of industries, including manufacturing, construction, media, professional services, education, and film and entertainment. And if that's not enough, for over 20 years, Lois has served as a regular part-time professor at California State Polytechnical University in Pomona, teaching eager minds how to excel in the business world using behavioral-based models. In her spare time, if all of that wasn't enough, Lois puts her creative mind and musical talents as a classically trained pianist and music teacher. She is also a published poet, songwriter, producer, and screenwriter. As a side note, in late 2023, Lois was co-executive producer of a full-length feature film, earning high ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. It was released on Amazon Prime called The Girl in the Back Seat. Some of the proceeds from this production are donated to global anti-human trafficking initiatives. Lois earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and her master's degree in organizational leadership from Chapman University, and is honored to serve as an active member of the board of directors for Autism Heroes. Please join me in welcoming Lois to the stage.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Jeff. The way that you presented me, I'm in awe because I'm just Lois. So I appreciate that. And thank you. Thank you. And it's an honor to be here.
You know, it's really interesting to me to see the humility after, walking through the highlights of this resume, such broad experience, such depth of experience. And I'm really honored to have you with us today.
Thank you.
In a previous conversation, Lois, we talked about one of your, I'm not sure if I would call it an operational model or maybe a strategic approach to leadership. You call it HEART, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Great. Well, through years and years of leadership, I've learned that there are very specific things that a leader can utilize. And I'm a firm believer of where the mind is, there too the heart will follow. So if you practice enough mechanically and transactionally enough, eventually it becomes you. And so for a long time, I've been using this model, and it's really an acronym for HEART. And it starts with honesty as the foundation. Empathy is next. You have to have some level of empathy, but a lot of people have empathy, but they don't have appreciation. And appreciation is what you're giving to somebody else. It's not about you, it's about them. And so it's really important to have both the empathy to understand someone else, because that's an incoming, and the appreciation is outgoing. This is something you give back.
I love that. Sorry, before you move on, I love that concept of what comes in, what you do with it, and then what you send back out. A question that comes to mind for me, and I think about this quite a lot actually, around the subject of empathy. The question is, can you teach somebody to feel something that they don't?
And the answer is yes. I have seen it in my classrooms. I've seen it in multiple workplaces. One of the things that I do is a lot of one-on-one leadership coaching. And if the heart is willing, if the mind is willing, because they want to change, or they recognize that they've hit a glass ceiling and they don't know how to get beyond that. The tools to give them to actually do it mechanically and really start listening. It really does come with active listening. That's the very first thing that I do, is I give them the techniques for the active listening. We go through a series of exercises to help them practice that. Active listening is not easy, and you get better over time the more you do it.
Right.
So it's really taking out the world of interference and distractions that we have and really center focused on the other individual. And when you do that over and over again, the empathy starts to come. And I'm really talking about the people in the middle of the bell curve. Let's not talk about the fringes or the ones that have the antisocial tendencies or the narcissist out there. We're really talking about the average manager, director, COO, whoever, C-suite that is really struggling, but have really great intentions. And so it's just a matter of the tools that they need, giving them the opportunities to practice, encouraging them to practice it on a regular basis, because the ability is a really key component in this. And then over time, it comes.
Yeah, it's I wrestle with this because, well, for one thing, iBridged works with a lot of organizations that are super technical. These are very quantitative, focused brains and high degrees of logic. And so empathy, and there's no value judgment here. There's no right or wrong. Empathy is one of those things that we see a lot of very technical leaders really wrestling with. And I wrestle with the question, can we teach them to feel something that we don't? I'm not sure from my perspective that you can actually teach that. What you can teach, though, are what I would call empathetic behaviors. And to your point, active listening is 100% a piece of that, because that's a form of a diagnostic. It's what's coming in. And then teaching them the behavior using that model you mentioned earlier, what it is that you give back is a behavior that can be learned, even if you don't feel it naturally.
Yes. And to your point, Jeff, what we're talking about here is not revolutionary change in the individual. We're talking about evolutionary change, these very small incremental changes.
Yeah.
But I do believe the needle does change. It does over time. But to your point, it is the behaviors that we're seeing. And I think in a very highly technical position where they're very objective focused, what you first have to do is ask them to define empathy for themselves, because other people's definitions of empathy, my version of empathy is not going to be the same as anyone else's. And so to use that as the starting point to help them get to where they need to be, they have to be a part of that and engaged. And so how do they define empathy?
Okay.
And they may define it differently. But in order to get them to the next level, especially in the world of EQ, emotional intelligence, right? The first aspect of that is self-awareness. And so with that self-awareness comes that definition of finding empathy for yourself and then broadening that scope.
Okay.
And because you've got the truth in there of that person's truth of defining it, that little nugget, then you can take from there and grow further.
Awesome. What's the A?
So the A is appreciation, and the appreciation is giving back to the other person. It's not about you, it's about them. It's like the platinum rule. We all know the golden rule, do unto others as we want done to us. But the platinum rule is not about us. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with do unto others as they need to have done, right? And what is their need? And that appreciation is being grateful, being humble, being grateful for whatever, don't being entitled and expecting things. Be very appreciative for whatever it is that you get. We are owed nothing. And so when you start with that basis, then it's really easy to be appreciative of everything. But that's giving back to the other person. That's your job to pay it forward to them and give them what they need. So that's part of the heart. That's really the crux of the heart. The honesty is the foundation, right? The empathy needs to be there so you can create the appreciation. And then after appreciation comes respect. That mutual respect of, I don't care where you come from. I don't care what your background is. Nothing. What behavior are you exhibiting in front of me?
Mhm.
And is it respectful? And is my behavior back to you
Mhm.
equally respectful
Right,
so that
right.
we can have this very meaningful exchange? And then
When I
last,
before we move on to the T, what's coming up for me for the R, the respect component here, as I'm thinking about this in real time, I'm wondering about the overlay of psychometrics because respect can look different based on your type. Not only look different in terms of what one is projecting, but also what one is receiving. And, respect, I think for, if we're using DISC as an example, respect for a D looks a lot like recognizing their accomplishments and their successes. But respect for an S type might be more about recognizing the individual.
exactly. Yes. And encouraging them and acknowledging whatever they've given you. They're more focused on the inter-exchange of the relationship.
Right.
Whereas a high D is much more transactional,
Mm.
right? They're more focused on the results. What have you done?
On winning.
Well, that too. And recognizing, gee, thanks, Joe, for your accomplishment on the Murphy project. I really appreciate what you've done. Whereas if Joe is a high S,
Mm.
that's not going to be what he wants.
That's
He's
right.
going to be looking at, well, let me give you an example. In the newspaper industry, we were going through obviously a lot of radical change. And one of the things was that even though through the change that we were doing, we really needed to upgrade our printing system, our printing presses.
Mhm, mhm.
And so we invested in some very state of the art equipment to print these newspapers. And the person who had been in charge of the printing presses for 25 years was a very high S.
Mhm.
And so he was in charge of launching the whole thing. He did it under budget, deadline before the deadline, did everything. He actually brought a cot in and slept there at
Mm.
night so he could get up early in the morning and finish everything. I mean, he just worked so hard. So when it was done, if I were operating from a high D, I
Mhm.
would say, gee, thanks so much,
Right. You
Joe.
did a great job.
Here's $2,000 bonus. Here you go. The way to go.
Mhm. Yep.
That wasn't meaningful to him
Right.
because he was a high S. What he wanted was he loved fishing with his son. The experience of fishing with his son, that relationship was critical to him. And he didn't get to do it often. So what I did is I went and got him a fishing license. I got him a fishing pole, 2 fishing poles, and a 5-night stay in a lodge so that he could fish with his son.
What a
I'm
neat
telling you that it was something that I just went ahead and did. As a high D, you're thinking transactionally, I've got to do something that's meaningful for him. But what I missed until afterwards was the relationship
Yeah.
part of it. And
Yeah.
when it was over, what was interesting to me is for years after that, I would hear him tell that story
Of course. Of
over
course.
and over again. And
Yeah.
that one I got right.
Well, and the fact that you're hearing this story over years to me says what you did in that particular move. In other words, going all the way back to the R and defining respect based on, personality types and needs. You recognized his need when you expressed your appreciation, showing respect for the work that he had done. You did it in his language, on his frequency, and that's what made it meaningful. You created probably one of the most loyal employees on the planet as a result of noticing and taking advantage of those things.
True. And just by accident, I would have loved to have said that I was brilliant at doing it. But the fact is, I just got lucky. And sometimes
Well, you know now.
the
You know
harder
now.
you work, the luckier you get. But there were also missteps. There were many times where I would thank an employee. Here's another example where I failed. There was an executive assistant, and she had bent over backwards to do a project that was really outside of her scope to do, and she did it brilliantly. And so I thought, you know what? She loves movies. I'm going to buy her 2 movie tickets. And it was an expensive movie because it was a 3D and the whole thing.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and we had a real tight budget. So I bought her that and bought her a nice steak dinner for her and her husband to go. And I missed that one because she had 4 kids at home. So in order to do that, she had to pay a babysitter to go and do the night out.
Yeah.
And I overheard that of her talking. She actually was giving her tickets away.
Oh
And it
no.
broke my heart. I overheard
Yeah.
her in the lunchroom doing that. And I thought, okay, I've done a horrible disservice. I should have looked at that a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the things I think that leaders, especially senior leaders, really wrestle with is how do we connect with our employees, the resources that we manage and lead? How do we connect with them to understand how to motivate them again on their frequency and in their language? And from my perspective, it's probably one of the most important tools. Psychometrics as a category is probably one of the most important tools that leaders have available to them to be able to do exactly that. Whether it's predictive index or DISC or Myers-Briggs, all of them help you tune into the frequency of those individuals so that you can do exactly the opposite of what you did there, which is find something that's meaningful and usable. You're not missing in the
Yes.
effort. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
great story. And again, thank you for the humility of sharing something that didn't go so well.
I have a lot of them.
Don't we all, Lois, right?
I've skinned my knees a lot, and I've
Yeah.
learned, and there's only one choice: is you pick yourself up and you learn from that and
Learn
you
from it.
become better,
Yeah.
because that becomes the top of mind. I call it TOMA, top of mind awareness. That
Mhm.
becomes who you are going forward, and you don't ever lose sight of that again, ever.
Yeah.
That drives you.
I think some of my best lessons are from failures. Failure is a magnificent teacher, painful, distasteful, but often most effective.
But I also look at it as a pathway to success. You
Right,
can't have
exactly.
success without that.
Yeah, you got that one wrong so you can get the next one right.
Right.
That's the
I
model.
just wish I would know when the failures came up so I could plan for those a little bit better.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Sorry.
I know. Yeah, right. So the last one, because we're on the heart. So honesty, empathy, appreciation, respect. And then the last one is trust. And
Mhm.
trust is literally the pinnacle. The reason it's last is not because it's last, it's because it's the pinnacle at the very top of
Mhm.
the relationship.
Mhm.
And it is two things: build trust. That's it. It's really that simple. And it's much harder in execution. But two things: consistent, predictable behavior and frequent communication. The fastest way to destroy trust: inconsistent, unpredictable behavior and lack of communication.
Mhm.
And I try to drill that into the leaders that I work with and that I try to coach, guide, and direct, to help them understand it really is that simple. They just need to do it, and it
Mhm.
will build the trust. The stats even tell us is that even if you're a type A personality and you get angry at times and you throw your pen down on the desk, if your employees can predict how your behavior is because it's been consistent over time, that when you hear bad news you're going to get angry, then the employees still have a high level of trust in you if your communication has been frequent with them, and then they can plan more effectively. Okay, don't go talk to Lois till she's had her coffee and it's not it's not 10 o'clock in the morning, which is
Right,
not me.
right,
You can
right.
talk to me anytime, but that's an example. We find employees doing that, of planning exactly how they're going to deliver that news and then packaging the news in such a way that is going to be receptive. That
Mhm.
technique is actually excellent, really good, because they're reading the other person and doing that platinum rule, meeting them where they're at, so that then
Yeah.
they can get back what they need, the answers they need, so they can go and do their jobs.
I love the perspective. You use some language there that I typically use as well, and we call it predictive trust. Do what you say you're going to do. Make sure you're consistent in doing that. Communicate it. Make sure that the discipline around that, which is a consistency element,
Right.
is high. But are you open to an expanded perspective on this?
Love it.
When we go back to the concept of the platinum rule, the golden rule: treat others how you'd like to be treated.
That's mutual respect.
Right, mutual respect.
Mhm.
The platinum rule is treat others how they want to be treated versus how
Right.
you want to be treated. Again, you can look at it and say, but if I want to be treated a certain way and I want that for others, then that's a good thing. Well, it says you're coming from a good place. I get that. But that may not be, based on individuals' psychological profiles, that may not actually be what's best for them.
Exactly.
So when we overlay a psychometric on the concept of trust, and we think about the D's and the C's, and let's use DISC as an example here, D's and C's are very transactional in nature. So predictive trust is their form of trust. If you're trying to establish trust with those individuals, 100%, you need to be consistent in doing what you say you're going to do. And if you're not able to deliver what you said you were going to, you must be proactive in the communication process to go in and reset expectations. And if they're simply not going to trust you. But on the I and the S side of the DISC chart, these are relationship-oriented trust folks, right? So I'm an S and SC, so my primary letter is S. I want to know, check this out, I want to know that you have my back. If I don't think you've got my back, then it doesn't matter how consistent you are in doing what you say you're going to do. I am not going to have a trust for you. And so if you don't understand that people who operate on the relational side of trust aren't operationalizing trust in the same way, you may be extending transactional based trust, predictive based trust, and expecting it to be reciprocated, and it doesn't show up.
Very good. And I love that perspective. I think that the way in which to get there, to understand what the person's definition of trust is, and the way in which they manifest that trust in their behavior and in their relationships, is ask the question. A lot of times we don't have the liberty to determine whether or not this person is a high S or a high C or a high I.
Yeah.
We're going in blindly to a meeting, and we may never have met this person before. Sometimes if we're talking about a relationship with our subordinate, that's different. But how do you do that? You have to ask the question, and you have to include inquisitive kinds of questions to determine and drill down. How are they thinking? What is their motivation? What is meaningful to them?
Right.
And I think those things are incredibly important in order to find what I call the common denominator between two people.
Brilliant.
You've got to find the connectivity, that link.
Yeah.
And I do this when I go into people's offices for the first time. I look around their office, because whatever is on display is usually something that's impactful and meaningful to them. So if it's a kid with a baseball bat posed, or if it's a book on a bookshelf, I look to find what that person is, what they're about, and ask them questions. Get them talking so that I have a better understanding of who that person is. And you're exactly right. High I's and high S's are very relationship built.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they are looking for reassurance in their leader by far.
Yeah.
And for you to say, I want to make sure that person has my back. Yeah, that's that reassurance that comes in.
Yeah,
and
100%.
that goes back to that predictable behavior. Can I predict how this person's going to behave? Is that person consistent over time? And those two elements also play into, do I have your back? Right? Or does that person have my back? Right? So that, and it's through time and the shared experiences that we map out and determine whether or not that person does have our back, right? So picture this, you go to a restaurant for the first time and you get a bad meal. Likelihood of you going back to that restaurant is probably zero.
Very low, right?
But if you go to the same restaurant and you've developed the relationship with the waiters, waitresses, the owner, you love the food, and all of a sudden you get a really bad meal or you get really bad service, are you going to go back?
Very
Absolutely.
likely. Yeah.
100%. Because what you're judging that on is the length of time, the consistency and predictability of that experience that you've had with that restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I love that
So
perspective.
it's really important to ask questions and to really start getting to know the true self of the other individual. And that goes back to that active listening as well, right? Asking the questions and really listening and learning.
There are a couple of coaching techniques that we use. Obviously, our preference is let's get everyone assessed in the organization so that those particular styles and psychological needs are known, and then we don't have to guess at it. That would be a
Love
gold
that.
standard, gold standard from my perspective. Let's make it easy for people to figure this stuff out with
Right.
each other. On the other hand, when that's not available, and sometimes it's not, we teach something called people reading. People reading.
Hmm.
And so now you are evaluating those people through a lens, through a model that allows you to go, I'm seeing some I here, I'm seeing some S here, and then test for that. Is it true? Is what you're seeing accurate? What exactly do I need to do to be able to connect and tune in to that individual's frequency so we've got a clear signal back and forth? So that's typically our approach. The way we get there when the assessment isn't in place is for an individual to do something that we call reflective listening. And reflective listening is not only are you sort of saying back in your own words what you heard, but
So
you're
the paraphrasing of yourself.
but you're delivering it in the same style that you're observing. So let me give you a couple of examples. With extroversion as an example, we see a lot of facial expressions. We see a lot of excitement and enthusiasm and energy. You may see people talking with their hands or their whole body. There's a lot of movement going on. So while you're reflective listening, when you summarize back, give it back to them in the same way that you see. When you do that, that extroversion one is just an example. The introversion works the same way.
Mhm.
If the body is sort of quiet and still, and maybe even the delivery is a little softer in how they're speaking, right? Then do that. Mirror, right? Reflect back what it is that you're seeing and observing. And if you do that, your body viscerally will help you connect with the person you're talking to.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Daniel Goleman did a lot of research on this very topic, and he has several books out on it. And it's how the body is mirroring the other body, the
Mhm.
other person, and it even gets down to the physiological levels
Yes.
of heart rate, breathing, all of that.
Yes.
So we can, and I hate using the word manipulate, but when you're in a adversarial meeting with someone, you can adjust your body language and your tone and your pace to meet that other person's needs and adjust that, including the body language, all of the even the fast pacedness, extrovert,
Right.
and it works very well in a practical application of an interview where you've got
100%.
somebody that you don't know at all and you're trying to get information from them so that you can make
Mhm.
a determination. So
Yeah.
you're watching this body language and you can read how uncomfortable they are to begin with, because it's like what Dr. Amy Cuddy says, like being in social quicksand.
Mhm.
That's really what it comes down to. And so what you try to do is mirror their behavior, not be opposite of their behavior. When you're trying to
Mhm.
exert power, you do opposite of the behavior. But when
Mhm.
you're trying to meet them where they're at and develop more of a collegial relationship, then you want to match them.
Yeah, and I don't typically have a sense that it's manipulation. I think the distinction is, what are you motivated by? And
Creative good.
yeah, from my perspective, if your motivation is connection, communication, and collaboration, even if things are tense or even if they're adversarial, those are tools and techniques that help you get through that conflict and have positive outcomes. I don't think that's manipulation. I think that's just smart behavioral
Yeah,
adjustment.
that's I agree with you 100%. I just wish there were a better word to explain what you're doing, from a standpoint of trying to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
influence, I suppose, is the closest word that we have to doing that. That's more positive. It does work, and I'm trying to think of Dr. Daniel Goleman's book on that specific topic. I can't think of the name of that particular book right now, but
Okay.
it's out there.
All
Yeah,
right. Well, listen, I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. I have a couple of questions for you that I
sure.
ask all of my guests. I invite you to have fun with it to the extent that you can. The first question is, what's the best piece of leadership advice you've been given and didn't take?
I've had the privilege of having two really awesome mentors in my life. Both were former bosses. and they took me under their wing, and I actually learned an awful lot from them.
Mm-hmm.
But one gave me advice of that I didn't take, and I have I have since taken that advice, but it was never assume that you know more than the other person in the room. Never assume you know more than the other person in the room. I have learned the hard way on that one
Mm-hmm.
many times over. And so, in the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, I've very consciously had that as TOMA, top of mind awareness, in my
Mm-hmm.
head anytime I go into a room. So, in other words, I'm going to assume that I know nothing and they know everything. And then I sit back and I listen.
Mm-hmm.
As a high D, that's really hard to do because you want to express yourself. But what I find is I learn so much more by sitting back and listening. And really, I think that's what my mentor was really telling me to do, is to listen more. But the way in which I was going to understand it was the way in which he framed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice.
So, but yeah, I have since taken that advice, and I sit back and I listen more. So
Awesome. Awesome.
I gain more info.
If you could wave a magic wand or push a button and, go back 20 plus years as you were sort of coming into your role, zeroing in on your expertise and career choice around HR leadership, what advice, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself back then?
I think that's a great question. Boy, I would load up myself with as much as I possibly could. I think not taking time to breathe, number one, because a high D doesn't take time to breathe. And my mom used to say, even as a child, she'd say, Lois, you have to have time to just stop and smell the roses.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I never did. And I do kind of regret that a little bit. But I think also the advice going back to that, I think it would be learning as much as I could as a sponge, just learning it, asking more questions as I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning. Because a lot of times, and I see this in the classroom with my students, they'll come in and they're going to be afraid to ask a question. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
try to make the environment in the classroom very open. In fact, the first thing I do when I come in the classroom and the first night of class, I'll say, you guys are going to learn. I'm going to learn far more from you than you'll ever possibly learn from me. So let's just get that dynamic on the table right now.
Love that. Love
So
that.
I try to lay that out so that it is really an open forum to ask questions. What I find is that students aren't asking questions, and about 1 out of every 10 might. And I really encourage people to ask more questions, because 10 more people are afraid to ask that question.
Right.
That one brave soul asked the question. Now everybody knows. If
Everybody
that
gets
one brave person wasn't there that night in class, nobody's going to know. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to be brave, ask questions, even when you think you're stupid at asking the question. Learn everything you can and ask as many questions as you can, so
Yeah.
that you get a full experience and understanding of what it is that you're trying to learn or trying to gain or trying to do.
I love that. I love that perspective. Gosh, several things were coming up for me while you
Right?
one of those is sort of this idea, if I could do that, if I could go back to my earlier self, I think the way that I would sort of summarize what you've said for me would be just telling myself it's okay to not know. Let's start there.
Right.
It's okay to not know, and that you really have a strong ability to know. So now we can put that into
Trust your
action
instincts, in other words.
and go get the information. And,
Yeah.
obviously asking questions is one of those mechanisms, research, talking to other people, whatever, but
Yeah.
just giving yourself permission to not have all of the answers sort of de-stresses the not knowing. And it sort of allows you then to go focus on getting that information. So I think if I were giving myself information on that particular topic, if I could go back, that's probably the advice I would give.
Yeah, and I think mine comes from a place of, I'm a lifelong learner. And as you
Yeah.
can see from my background, I'm very diverse. And it's funny because when you first go to school and you get your bachelor's, you think you know it all.
Right.
When you get your master's, you think, okay, I don't know as much as I thought I knew.
Right.
And then I've heard from people with their doctorate degrees of, now I know nothing.
Ah, it's like
So
the
it's just the opposite.
It's like the Benjamin Button.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
the
exactly
older
right.
yeah, you're going backwards. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. When I went to grad school, in one of my very, very early classes, I had a professor who said something that profoundly shifted my academic experience at that level. He said, Jeff, for the last, for all of your lower education, all the way up to and including through your bachelor's degree, we gave you information. We asked you to give it back, and we asked you to give it back in the form of tests and quizzes and presentation to prove that you received the information. And we called that education. At the graduate level, we're not going to do that. We're going to give you information, subject matter expertise, and then we want to know what you're going to do with it.
Right.
How are you going to be able to take that knowledge and turn it into contributing to the subject, contributing to the topic in some way? That's what we're going to consider actual education. And it was just such a profound mind shift for me. So I guess I'm not sure how that relates to our conversation, but
No,
it came up
I
for me
think it
while we were
does,
talking.
because what happens is, in that realm, you become a practitioner.
Exactly right.
You're a theorist to begin with, then you're a practitioner, right? And then my friends who are doctorates, they are very humble in most cases about I think that the thought is, I'm not going to learn it all by the time I die. I've barely hit the peak of the iceberg of learning, and my life is just limited, and I'm not
Yeah.
going to be able to learn a lot. So I value that opinion, and I try to expand. That's why I hardly ever sit still. TV watching is not a pastime of mine, because I just fall asleep, right?
Same.
I'm
Same.
always doing, because I don't want to waste time. I've got to learn something else. I'm a lifelong
Mhm.
learner, and
Love that.
I just can't learn enough.
Love that. My final question for our session today, Lois, if you had advice to give, and this is probably top of mind for you already, if you had one single piece of advice that you could give to somebody coming into the field of HR, what would that be? And actually, let me broaden the question just a little bit. Maybe it's somebody who's new and entering into the field, or maybe it's somebody at the HR executive level. What's the one thing that you would want any one of those audiences to know about how to be successful in HR?
Have a passion for people.
Good. Really good. Wow. Yeah, really good.
That's it.
So succinct and on point. That is exactly right. Yeah, I love that answer, Lois. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
that. Lois, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed our conversation today. I hope you did too.
I did, Jeff. It was a great exchange. Thank you.
And just out of curiosity, if people are interested in looking you up on LinkedIn and connecting and saying hello, are you open to that?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, there's two of me on LinkedIn. And one is, and I'm still trying to get it off LinkedIn, because it was the very first time I went onto LinkedIn and entered all my stuff. And it just shows a very limited, it shows me teaching at Argosy, which was before Cal Poly,
Okay.
or during Cal Poly, but earlier years.
So that's
Um,
a non-active.
So that's a no. So you've got to keep going down to find me, and then you'll see all my background and everything. So
Okay.
yes, I would love it if people would reach out. I love connecting with people. I love learning. So I'm going to learn far more from everyone else than they could possibly learn from me. So I'm welcome to it, and I would enjoy connecting.
Awesome. Lois, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, Jeff.
It was a real pleasure. We'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.